When you think of trans women, what comes to your mind? Do you think of a mentally ill individual trying to invade women's spaces? Maybe you picture the Latino, the so-called pervert, making sexual representations with food at Disney. Maybe you think back to the time about a video that went viral of a trans woman in a gas station correcting everyone, saying, "It's ma'am." Whether you're on the right or the left or completely upside down, I'm going to explain to you why this is all propaganda. Alright, so I think we should start with the backstory. Trans people have always existed, but the understanding and the acceptance of trans people has varied tremendously over the years. However, when we go back in time, you'll see that trans people weren't just misunderstood. You'll find that we were mostly invisible, pathologized, and ignored. In the early 1900s, Magnus Hirschfeld, a pioneer in sexology, founded the Institute for Sexual Science in Berlin. He researched transgender and intersex people. His wealth of knowledge and work largely contributed to the understanding of gender and sex nonconforming people. He even supported early gender-affirming care and procedures. By 1930, Hirschfeld facilitated the first vaginoplasty, which he called, it sounds like a spell, it sounds really weird, but it's genitalum Wandelung. It translates to transformation of genitals. Genitalum Wandelung. Okay. He would even grant his patients legal transvestite cards, which allowed them to present as themselves in public. Sorry, I keep stuttering. Although society had mixed reactions, this introduced the valid existence of trans people. On May 6, 1933, unfortunately, the Institute, along with 20,000 books, were burned to the ground. The reigning party at the time, which we know was led by Hitler, was very against anything that deviated from the norm. So transgender people, queer people, and gender non-conforming people were included. On the other side of the world, drag balls had marked a safe haven for trans and gay individuals where they could exist and express themselves, as opposed to the real world where they were largely discriminated against. In society, we weren't allowed to exist as we were often seen as delusional and mentally ill. However, even though society's view was negative, it still lacked foundation and information. By the 1950s, the existence of trans people were brought to the spotlight in the United States when the press headlined, "Ex-GI becomes blonde beauty." Although she wasn't the first person to undergo sex reassignment surgery, she marked something new to the United States. Her experience helped give everyone an understanding of trans people and provided some positive representation and visibility to the community. However, of course, with any new information, there's always going to be some backlash. By the 1960s, acceptance and views of LGBT people were still hostile. Now, do you remember how I talked about safe havens? Well, that includes bars and nightclubs. They allowed self-expression and safety of LGBTQ people. However, the government still considered them illegal. They often raided these spaces, harassing, arresting, and terrorizing the people seeking refuge. One popular bar, as we know, was a Stonewall Inn, which welcomed everyone, including runaways and queer youth. On the morning of June 28th, police raided the bar, and instead of dispersing like they normally do, people got angry. Police were manhandling and beating them. Since people were fed up with these constant raids, a full-blown riot began, which incited the Stonewall riots. These riots didn't result in gay or trans people receiving rights, but many organizations were created in order to gather people and make community, which was, of course, very positive and very good for us. Now, these riots may have provided more representation for the LGBTQ community, but by the 1980s, there was a whole other thing to worry about. Something super scary, something completely unheard of. By the 1980s, there was a whole crisis that created many of the stigmas we have today. The AIDS epidemic harmed the community in every way. What originally was said to originate from chimpanzees spread to humans. How? We don't know, but we have ideas. Some of the first cases were identified in gay men, which sparked a lot of controversy and moral panic. And I mean, gay men only have sex with gay men, and the primary route of transmission was anal sex. So, of course, it mostly spread within the community. However, misinformed people saw this as a gay plague. Unfortunately, this caused gay and trans people to be seen as dirty and sexual deviants, which doesn't make sense because straight people can catch it and spread it just as much. So, due to all of this, we were heavily frowned upon. Treatment for AIDS was eventually developed and marked a new era for us. Now, receiving proper healthcare, whether it was for AIDS, an illness, or a condition, was paramount. This, of course, included gender dysphoria. As trans activism grew, so did programs and organizations. More research and studies helped to treat gender dysphoria. Legal advocacy and protections started giving hope to many trans individuals. Of course, that was until recently. The push for visibility and rights in the 1990s gave leeway to LGBTQ people becoming more mainstream. By 1995, Bill Clinton included sexual orientation and non-discrimination language. Around this time, public figures like Ellen DeGeneres or Greg Louganis, I'm sorry if I pronounced that wrong, came out. America's Next Top Model even included trans people like Isis King. She's so gorgeous. Of course, not all representation was good. I'm looking at you, Jerry Springer. But we were being pushed into the spotlight and we were gaining more recognition. By the early 2000s, Republican views started to slip and more liberal views about inclusion and acceptance became more popular. Of course, conservatives got scared and they firmly tried to regain control. In the year 2000, George W. Bush ran with strong Christian values. Now, even though there was this back and forth between parties, the world ended for a day on September 11, 2001. A prosperous and united nation was put in grave danger, and there was a terroristic attack on the United States. And due to this, there was a public uproar about foreign terrorism. However, this included domestic terrorism or terrorism within the United States as well, meaning anybody that poses a threat to the common American or American values. That can very much include Christian traditional values. Conservatives later used this fear to turn people against anyone they consider degenerates, which we know to be anyone who's not white, straight, Christian, or cisgender. By 2004, Bush had tried to pass an amendment which banned gay marriage. Of course, it failed, which began frustrating the Republican Party. However, popular views were, of course, becoming more liberal, more inclusive, more accepting. In 2008, Obama was elected into office, which was very new to most Americans as we had never had a president of color be in office. And of course, under his presidency, popular views started becoming law. The culture war intensified. In 2010, gender identity became a protected class under the EEOC. In 2012, the EEOC wrote that Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibits gender identity-based discrimination. It later did the same for sexual orientation in 2015. On June 26, 2015, a landmark ruling marked a new beginning for gay people. Obergefell versus Hodges ruled that same-sex marriage was legal. By this point, you could tell that Republicans were fed up to the brim. Now, in the media, you saw the introduction of well-known figures such as Laverne Cox, who was famous for her role in Orange is the New Black. She even graced the cover of Time magazine with the headline, "The Transgender Tipping Point." You also saw Jazz Jennings, a child transitioner who shared her transition with the whole world, giving us a new perspective of what it was like to transition, especially as someone who was very young. Sorry, I had to take a break. This green light's actually making me epileptic. Anyways, thank you, Jazz. She paved the way for child transitioners, especially child transitioners like myself. I transitioned at 14, but still I would not have access to all of these resources if it wasn't for you, Jazz. Thank you. By this time, trans people had started feeling comfortable. There was more representation, more empathy, and more public understanding of trans people. A lot of us didn't feel the need to hide anymore. One example of this was Caitlyn Jenner. Now we know her as the Olympian who was very masculine, but through all of this, Caitlyn knew who she wanted to be. Millions of viewers witnessed the idea of transness for the first time. All over social media, you could see people documenting their transition and sharing it with the whole world. This is kind of how I found out what being trans was. I saw people like Gigi Gorgeous or Blair White, which we don't really like anymore. In my opinion, people actually started to understand what being trans was. It wasn't like the tired old stereotype of a perverted man, like that was so 1960s. Please don't bring that back. But we did. It was medical, it was personal, and it was visible. However, people are so gullible and quick to change their mind, especially when it's served on the platter of common sense. By 2016, elections arrived, and Republicans knew they couldn't confront these changes head on, so they decided to adjust their run for president a bit more. This is when you saw Donald Trump being very supportive of the LGBTQ community and making sure that everyone was equal. However, of course, this was just different. And not many people liked him, but he was a man with a distinguished background from high society. He was a real estate developer, owner of several gambling businesses and beauty pageants. He even dabbled in reality TV. Through all of this, Donald Trump was a man who established himself as powerful, rich, and especially likable. This is why you initially saw him registered as Democrat in 2001. He was even pro-choice and an ally of the LGBTQ community. He donated and appeared at several fundraisers that were Democratic. After several occasions of him playing around with the idea of becoming president, he finally decided to run in 2016. However, to try and win everyone's votes, He did not only try to appeal to Republicans but to Democrats as well. Remember, he wanted to be liked, so he repeated what other people said in order to be in favor of the public. Compared to past Republicans, it almost seemed hopeful. After a tumultuous election, Trump won. Well, not really, but he was put into office. By this time, Republicans were fed up with all the liberal Trump. And Trump, who wasn't a sincere person, finally showed his true colors. He wanted to give his party what they wanted so he could gain power and maintain it. Of course, he targeted several groups, but one group that was starting to gain a lot of popularity was LGBTQ people and their poisoning of America. But by this time, gay people were widely understood and more common, so they had to move on from them. Who do they choose? The population that's widely misunderstood, has awful stereotypes, and is extremely vulnerable, so they can't really afford to defend themselves. He decided to ban trans people from entering the military. Protections were rolled back for trans students. Homeless trans people could be denied housing, and their poisonous healthcare was put in danger. But of course, we were just a scapegoat so that they could distract you from the real issues in the world. Are you mad you didn't get that job? Blame immigrants and DEI. Are your taxes too high? Blame the sex changes that little kids are getting in elementary school. Are your schools getting shut up? Blame the mentally ill trans kids. The thing is, after a certain amount of time, this nonsense starts to make sense. And of course, when the government wants you to be afraid of someone, they'll revive the tired stereotype of us being predators and put emphasis on individuals who weren't representations of our community, even though there were studies that show that cisgender men are more likely to become sex offenders. Although it sounds crazy at first, the media slowly starts planting seeds. Maybe they are an issue. And of course, you don't understand us, or maybe we even make you feel uncomfortable. This uncertainty is normal and completely expected, especially when you don't know much about us. But fear loves a target. And people get scared, so they start to point fingers, just like they did with so many others before us. For example, the native savages, or the outspoken women they called witches, or the African American rapists, the Jewish thieves, and now it's the transgender monsters. Now around this time, memes would go around, stereotypes are recycled and created, and rotten apples are made to represent our entire community. Suddenly we're being accused of tricking men, invading women's spaces, preying on children, and spreading trans propaganda. Under Trump's administration, he made that fear policy. And while not everyone liked trans people, they most certainly did not like Trump. This is when we're approaching the elections and the woke era starts to commence. It's like 2019, the pandemic is taking over and everyone is stuck at home and they have nowhere to look except their phone. TikTok started becoming popular and people from all backgrounds could socialize. People started to see each other for who they were and understand each other. Oppressed and minority groups now had a spotlight, and it was mostly good until it wasn't. Now it was 2020 and people were getting tired of Trump, especially with how he was handling the pandemic and COVID. Everything just seems so unstable under him. Biden is brought into office and several of Trump's policies are repealed. Civil rights meant equal rights for everyone, especially trans people. We were once again allowed in spaces we aligned with and got the medical and legal care we needed. The support was here and the future looked promising. Christian and traditional ideals were seen as unjust, but as always, the pendulum always swings back, and what was first seen as acceptance and support quickly turned into annoyance and confusion. We were the ones that used 100 different pronouns, identified as trees, and could transition races. These bad stereotypes and examples brought us back to square one. We were the woke snowflakes that wanted to force kids to learn about pronouns in school and have sex changes in classrooms. We wanted to bring men into women's prisons and dominate women's spaces, especially into sports. Woke was the enemy, and once again, it was a problem. The point I'm trying to make is that we are not the evil that causes all the problems in the world. We are the new thing that threatens holiness and sanctity, just like many before us.
For me, because a woman is somebody that can have a baby under certain circumstances. She has a...
Therefore, everyone's solution is to exterminate us. We are currently being used as one of many scapegoats so that all problems are blamed on us. Republicans look like saviors, and so that you can be distracted from real pressing issues. For example, instead of trying to focus on gun violence, they're focused on drag queen story time and an inclusive education. They've defunded education and banned several books, even ones that weren't regarding queer people. They blame costlier healthcare on trans people for abusing all the resources. They're so concerned about women's safety, but they abuse victims and vulnerable people. Just look at the Diddy case. Black people were the criminals, gay people were responsible for AIDS, immigrants are taking your jobs, and now we're responsible for the corruption in the United States. Look around and wake up. You are being distracted from the real source of our problems, and so that Republicans can have a hold on you. Under this administration, I've had the floor under me quite literally disappear. We don't exist legally, our civil rights are being repealed, we're being socially outcasted, and we're being medically starved. They are trying to shove us back into the shadows, but we deserve the right to exist and be visible like any other person. I literally made a YouTube video about it. We're losing the right to have access to spaces where we once had no problem. We've always existed alongside you all, but now society is trying to pluck us out. Children who underwent full psychological evaluations for years are now losing access to not only life-saving healthcare, but to therapy and even a proper education. Can't even change our gender or names anymore, which literally doesn't even harm anyone. We are not evil and we are not trying to ruin this world. The already rocky life we have has now become impossible. We don't even need you to accept us or support us. We just ask for respect, something every person deserves.